Imagine standing at the edge of a grave that was dug by hand 10,000 years ago and finding inside it not just a body but flowers, red ochre painted carefully across the bones, a necklace of shells placed near the throat. Someone, long before writing or cities or anything we would recognize as civilization, stopped everything, gathered people together, and did something deliberate for the dead. That is where this begins. Because grief is not a modern problem. It is not something that arrived with psychology or therapy or the internet. It is one of the oldest things about us, older than language, older than agriculture, older than any institution we have ever built. And the way ancient humans responded to death tells us something quietly remarkable about why you feel the way you feel when someone you love is gone, and why some of the things that help you most are not new at all. The real question this episode is sitting with is this: what did human beings actually do with grief before there were words for it? And what does that reveal about what grief is actually for? Because here's the thing most people do not realize: grief, as strange and as painful as it feels, is not a malfunction. It is not your nervous system going wrong. It is one of the most ancient and deeply wired responses in the human repertoire, and it was never meant to be gone through alone. Let us go back. Archaeological evidence going back at least 100,000 years shows that early humans buried their dead with intention, not just placed them somewhere to decompose, but arranged them carefully, sometimes in the fetal position, curled as though sleeping, sometimes facing a particular direction. Objects placed nearby, tools, food, pigment, things that mattered. The Neanderthals at Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq appear to have placed flowers around their dead, though researchers still debate exactly what the pollen evidence means. What is not debated is that the care was real, the deliberateness was real. These were not people disposing of a body, these were people performing something. And that performance was psychological as much as it was ritual. What those ancient gatherings did, even without knowing it in any clinical sense, was create a container for something that would otherwise have been formless and terrifying. Death is an ambush on the nervous system. It violates everything the brain is built around, namely the assumption that the people who matter to us will keep being there. When that assumption is suddenly gone, the nervous system does not quietly accept it. It searches. It keeps reaching for the person. It half expects them to walk through the door. That is not weakness or confusion. That is a brain doing exactly what it was wired to do. And ancient humans, without any theory of grief, seemed to understand instinctively that this needed to be marked, not rushed past, marked. The gathering around a body was not just ceremony. It was the community saying together, out loud, in action, something has changed. This person was here and now they are not, and we are going to stand still for a moment and let that be true. That collective pause did something that solitary grief cannot do. It made the loss real in a shared way, not just a private interior one, and that matters more than it sounds. There is a reason the most isolated forms of grief tend to be the hardest ones. Losses that cannot be named publicly, the kind that do not get funerals or acknowledgement. Losses that others do not validate as losses sit differently in the body. They have nowhere to go. They stay compressed. The ancient ritual of gathering was not superstition. It was the original grief support structure, built by people who had no language for what they were doing, but knew at some level that it needed doing. And it was not just the gathering. It was the doing of things with your hands. Across early human cultures, the response to death involved physical labor, digging, washing the body, carrying it, laying things in beside it, building a cairn of stones above it. These were not optional extras. They were central. And when you understand how grief actually moves through a body, that makes complete sense. Grief is not only emotional, it lives in the chest, in the throat, in the heaviness of the arms. It has a physical texture and purposeful physical action, something done with the hands for the person who is gone, gives the body somewhere to put that energy that has no other outlet. It is why people clean obsessively after a death, or cook for the bereaved family, or build something, or plant a tree. The body needs to do something. That impulse is not distraction, it is continuation. It is the same ancient instinct. Something else ancient humans seem to have done, judging by burial sites and anthropological study of contemporary hunter-gatherer communities, is tell stories. Not eulogies in a formal sense, but something more like keeping the person present through words, repeating their name, describing what they did, recounting what they were like. This is not sentimental, it is neurological. The brain consolidates and integrates memory through language and narrative. Telling a story about someone who died is part of how the mind begins to carry them differently, not as an active presence it keeps searching for, but as a known, held, stable memory. The story slowly does what the searching cannot. There is a concept in psychology called continuing bonds, which simply describes the way healthy grieving does not always mean letting go. It can mean finding a new way to maintain a relationship with someone who is gone, carrying them in a different form. For a long time, the dominant psychological view was that grief meant moving toward detachment, releasing the person and getting back to your life. But the evidence does not really support that as the only healthy path. Many people do better when they are given permission to keep the relationship just changed. And that maps almost exactly onto what ancient humans seem to be doing. They did not erase the dead. They placed objects beside them. They marked the ground. They kept saying the names. There is something quietly comforting in that if you sit with it. And then there is the communal eating. Almost every ancient and traditional culture the anthropologists have studied responds to death with shared food. A meal prepared, people gathered around it, eating together in the presence of absence. This is so universal, it is easy to dismiss as just a custom. But the body under acute grief often cannot eat. The appetite switches off. Sharing food in community is a gentle way of pulling someone back toward the rhythms of living without demanding it of them. It is the group holding the thread of ordinary life until the grieving person can hold it again themselves. None of this required a therapist. None of it required understanding the neuroscience of loss. It just required other people who stayed close, who did things with their hands, who kept saying the name, who brought food and sat down and did not leave too quickly. Here is the gentle shift this episode wants to offer. When grief arrives in your life, and it will, because that is what a life contains, you do not have to reinvent the response. The ancient answer was never complicated. It was presence, ritual, physical doing, story, and time held inside a community. The modern world has made all of those harder. We live apart. We grieve in private. We return to work quickly. We do not always have a community that knows how to stay. But knowing what the original structure was, you can sometimes build something like it. You can ask someone to come and sit with you, not to talk necessarily, just to be there. You can do something with your hands for the person you lost. You can say their name out loud to someone who will not flinch at it. You can eat with someone even when you are not hungry. These are not tricks. They are the oldest tools. This is general insight shared gently, and it is not a substitute for professional support. if grief has become something you cannot carry. What strikes me most about those ancient graves, the ones with the ochre and the shells and the flowers, is the evidence they leave of something so recognizable. People who did not know what they were doing exactly what needed to be done. The love in those graves is legible across 100,000 years. The care is legible. The refusal to just move on is legible. Grief is not new. The ache of it is not new. And the impulse to do something for the person you have lost, to mark the ground, to say the name, to stay together a little longer, that impulse is not irrational. It is as old as we are. If this felt like something you needed to hear, there is a new episode here every day, and if it resonated, quietly subscribing is a kind way to stay close.